Chapter 3. Highlanders and Animals, 1840s. A feared, to be scared, frightened. I was afeard you had got lost. By 1830, there were 4.5 million people living west of the Allegheny Mountains. Increasingly, in the mid-1830s, banks were issuing paper notes that had little or no gold to back them. President Andrew Jackson, by executive order, made restrictions of federal lands using those banknotes. The U.S. government expected payment in silver or gold. This caused economic instability and subsequently the Panic of 1837. A decade of economic depression followed as many businesses and farms held paper notes with very little value and huge debts to pay back. Unemployment rose to record levels, and many families had little or nothing to call their own. President Andrew Jackson was the first attempted presidential assassination. When the man snapped a misfire at point-blank range, he pulled out a second, and it also misfired. Old Hickory took his cane stick and thrashed the man for his deed. Those nearby, the president arrested the man, and a legend developed that Jackson had special or supernatural powers. In Jackson's first term, he assigned the first act of Congress to protect a natural resource. It reserved 4 parcels of land with hot mineral springs in Hot Springs, Arkansas, on April 20th, 1832. In the decade of the 1840s, a wave of revolutions spread across Europe, but a wave of immigrants spread across the land in America. Between 1820 and up to 1860, it is estimated that over 1/3 of immigrants coming into the United States were Irish. Millions of them came in hope of a new life. The Alexander Harness clan shows some Irish blood in their DNA. The Irish fled from disease and starvation and took risky jobs for low pay. They had lesser value in the eyes of employers than common slaves. At the end of the 1840s decade, gold was discovered in the new territory of California. Gold fever struck thousands of prospectors who hoped to strike it rich. The gold came at an opportune time, as the U.S. government needed gold to create currency. Paper money printed by banks was not acceptable to workers. Most of the California gold was minted into $1 coins. In time, silver replaced gold for smaller coins, and gold was used for larger valued coins. By the end of the 1840s, there was a growing belief in manifest destiny. It became the American view that the United States would inevitably own and occupy the entire region from the Mississippi to the Pacific coast, north through Oregon, and south, including the entire area from Texas to the Pacific. This belief fueled droves of adventurous immigrants to boldly go into new lands and establish homesteads. The westward movement created conflict with Indians, and the southwestern movement created conflict with the Spaniards. As immigrants moved to America, they brought cattle, swine, poultry, and honeybees with them. They carried with them wheat, barley, rye, fruit trees, and vines. With these transplants of animals and plants came new diseases and a host of small creatures that included the earthworm. The cattle of the Scottish Highlands had distinctive horns with wavy coats of hair in a variety of colors. Those cows were hardy and could withstand the harsh conditions of the highlands and made wonderful meat and rich milk for their owners. Their long hair hung from the crown of their head and covered their eyes to protect them from flies. In warmer climates, their hair was shorter, and they stored less fat than most breeds, making their meat lean. Records indicate the Scots raised the cows as far back as the 6th century. The Scottish Highlanders' diet included milk from their herds of cattle. Cows, sheep, and goats were milked and their flesh eaten. Milk was consumed and added to porridges or made into cheeses and butter. Scots were great hunters and fishermen and ate a variety of game and fish. Cattle were butchered in the cooler season of late fall and preserved with salt. No part of the animal was wasted, as even the organs were processed into the famous Scottish dish known as haggis. The innards were cooked with oatmeal in a sheep's stomach, along with onion and spices. It is the national dish of Scotland today. In hard times, the Highlander might take animal blood from their cattle and use it for making blood puddings. The Highlanders of Scotland were noted for their incredible strength and stamina in battle. Armed with swords, shields, and axes, they often defeated much larger armies who fought with guns and cannons. In time, the Scots gained notoriety in battle, especially with hand-to-hand combat. They could march for miles and be battle-ready immediately. Of particular interest was their ability to recover and heal from horrible wounds. Perhaps their diet of mostly animal products made them strong, and climbing the highlands gave them endurance. This was evidenced in even the older people as they continued strong into old age. Consider these traits as we will discover them in the life of Jenny Renfro Harness and her ancestors. A new food source had been introduced to the Isles from South America. After some time, it became fatal and caused many Scots and Irish to leave their homeland in search of something better. The history of the potato is uncertain as to how it first came to the Irish and then the Scots. Better and better yields of potatoes were made from breeding until it created a population that was dependent upon it for food. By the 1830s, the lumper potato was developed, which required less manure and was tolerant of poorer soils. By 1840, many families were eating potato meals 3 times a day. Those people were dependent upon the new crop being successful for them to survive another year. Then, a fungus-like organism began to attack the vines, causing them to rot in the mid-1840s. Spreading quickly, the fungus wiped out the new crop, leaving millions without any food for the coming winter. The era became known as the Great Hunger, as an estimated 1 million people died of starvation, and another million left Ireland and Scotland to live in other lands. The Highlands were affected less as the diversity of their food sources being animal was much less dependent on the potato. It is believed today that the blight originated in the Americas and was spread into Ireland and Scotland. Potatoes had become a cheaper source of food for feeding cattle than producing grain. What had once been a boon of plenty had turned into a desperate famine. Many of those who were able to escape the Great Hunger era came to America, where they joined other countrymen who had settled upon the lands as immigrants pushed westward. The westward thrust moved Mark and Elizabeth Renfro, parents of Jane Virginia Jenny Renfro, from Tennessee into Arkansas. There Mark died, and Elizabeth remarried James Hughes in Searcy County, Arkansas. Elizabeth Hensley Renfro brought 5 children with her into that marriage: Charlotte, Joshua Benjamin, Virginia Jane, Jenny, Nathaniel, and Joseph Leander. It was never easy for an established family to come under a new father, and that was possibly some of the reason that Jenny Renfro Harness did not remarry when she and her 2 boys were left without a husband and a father. The story is told that Mark and Elizabeth Renfro had brought their family to Arkansas in an ox cart. It was common for oxen to be used to pull carts or wagons. A cart had large wheels that could pass through mud better or cross over logs and boulders. Oxen worked best when teamed together by a wooden beam called a yoke. Working oxen has a history that dates to the early development of agriculture. By the 1840s, oxen brought many settlers to the open frontiers of the Midwest. Families in carts or wagons moved along rugged trails with hogs, crated chickens, and a milk cow, all following the lead of oxen. Most oxen were castrated bulls, called steers, who were trained to obey commands. Oxen had horns that were bound to the yoke and worked as brakes when the load pushed forward going downhill. While a horse might have cost $850, a team of oxen might have been purchased for only $50 in the 1840s. Additionally, oxen were not high-spirited like horses and could make it on wild grasses with their ruminant digestive system, where a horse needed some grain if they were being worked steadily. The wooden yoke of oxen was less expensive than the harness which was required for a horse. Leather was not as durable or strong as wood, so repairs were much easier to make when needed. Oxen could benefit from wearing shoes, but were less likely to develop foot problems than horses. Requiring less shelter than horses, oxen could be turned out into the woodlands and prairies to forage for themselves and rounded up again when there was work to do. Horses were faster moving than oxen, but when moving along unimproved trails or plowing rough ground, speed was not required or desired. The slow pace of the oxen was better suited for the conditions of the Ozark Hills, where the wilderness could not handle speed. A settler rushed to build himself a shelter and to clear a patch for a first crop of corn to feed him and his animals. The oxen were great for skidding logs, hauling loads, and could be sustained by the native grasses found in openings of the forest. Eventually, farming methods left the oxen behind as established farms preferred horses and newer inventions of equipment to grow and produce greater amounts of food. Speaking of horses, the draft horse was bred and developed for pulling heavy loads. The Clydesdale draft horse originated in Scotland in the 1820s and was named for the area of its origin, the River Clyde. Today in America, some of the Clydesdale horses are used by the Anheuser-Busch Brewery in St. Louis, Missouri, in a team of 8 for publicity and promotion of Budweiser. Several teams of them travel around the world for people to see the large animals that once were essential for heavy hauling at mines and on farms. The first team was purchased in celebration of the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, which pulled a white and gold beer wagon carrying the first case of beer down Pestalozzi Street in St. Louis. Belgians, Clydesdales, Percherons, and Shires were popular draft horse breeds in the 1800s. These enormous beasts were called gentle giants, and due to their strength and speed, New York City selected them for its first horse-drawn, steam-powered, fire-pumping wagon. In time, fire horses were used all over America to get firefighting equipment quickly to the scene. Firemen cared for their fire horses on site to swiftly mobilize them when needed. Due to the abundance of horses in New York City in the 1800s, some have called it the Big Crapple. Large animals need about 40 pounds of hay and feed per day, making a lot of crapple on the streets. The westward expansion of immigrants brought livestock to areas that had never seen such animals or birds. The native Indians had dogs and used them for hunting, and settlers brought dogs with them for hunting and to help protect their belongings. Dogs were popular in the homeland of Scotland, and several breeds originated from there. Scottish Terriers for hunting vermin, Scottish Collies for herding, Scottish Retrievers hunting dogs. Scottish sheepdogs, guard and herd. Scottish setters, bird dogs. Scottish deerhound, large game dogs. Most dog breeds of today are no older than 150 years. Nearly 200 breeds of dogs are recognized today, and several more are unofficially bred. Frontiersmen and settlers wanted dogs for traveling and for camping companions. The senses of a good dog were keen and quick to recognize both opportunities and dangers. A watchdog at night was particularly valuable as predators and mischief animals would visit the premises. Some dogs were used for pulling and packing in other cultures, but most of those that came to the Ozarks were for watching, catching, and protecting the interest of their master. When isolated from the company of others, the dog was one who was your listener and friendly companion. Having a furry friend might help you to not lose your wits or sanity during the long winter months of cold and snow. Had Mark Renfro or his daughter Jenny kept a journal, I'm sure there would have been some really good stories about their dogs. As storytelling around a fire in the evening before bedtime was a common experience, many stories and tales about dogs were among the favorites of children. The setting for the popular book Old Yeller is from the mid-1800s. The lives of the Renfros and the Harnesses in the Ozark Hills is a story of families that were surrounded by domestic animals. Their livestock was essential for their survival and livelihood as it had been for their ancestors. Today, more Americans own pets than those who own livestock by far. Only a handful of oxen are kept and worked today. Draft horses are equally rare. We have replaced the milk cow, the chicken, and salted meat with refrigerators that only store what is now found at the market. Small children have little to no knowledge of where much of the food comes from that they eat. Only a dog that now sleeps inside the house remains as a meager example of an important past when livestock and animals were vital to our existence. Reflection, persecution, poverty, famine, and liberty were major reasons for some immigrants to move west. For others, it was opportunity, adventure, and freedom that caused them to strike out on rugged trails and settle in wild country. Those pioneers were forged from generations of people who had survived long enough to establish their own seed of humanity and pass their name down in hope of it being sustained and remembered by their offspring. Their descendants shall be known among the nations, and their offspring among the people. All who see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the prosperity whom the Lord has blessed. Isaiah 61:9. In time, the blending of many different heritages will change the DNA markers of the Harness clan. But knowing their roots, ethics, faith, and history can anchor them with strength and purpose.